UFC 321 is about a week away, and I'm super excited for this card. Really pumped that Tom Aspinall is back in the octagon, main eventing. I think it's a really strong main card overall. Also, some really fun prelim matchups, plus a couple of late additions to this card within the last week or so. And so in this video, I'm going to be breaking down every single matchup, main card, and the prelims, picking a winner and how I think they get it done. Timestamps are going to be in the description if you guys want to jump around to specific fights. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. But let's dive right into the prelims, and the bout order is still kind of up in the air at this point with some of those late additions. But we're going to start off with Jaqueline Amorim taking on Mizuki Inoue. This is a women's strawweight fight. Amorim is honestly just a really fun kind of prospect in this weight class. She's a 10-1 pro record. She has an 100% finish rate, 2 knockouts, 8 submissions. She's already 4-1 in the UFC, riding a 4-fight win streak, and just a really impressive all-around grappler. She has submission wins in her career by armbar, rear naked choke, knee bar, arm triangle. She had a really slick triangle into an armbar within the UFC. She's dangerous on top and on bottom, and obviously with 8 of her 10 wins by submission, she's a very serious sub-threat. On the other side with Mizuki, her last fight was all the way back in September of 2023. She is 2-1 in the UFC, also primarily a grappler. 9 of her 15 pro wins are by sub. I just view Amorim as the superior grappler in this matchup. I like that she's staying active, picking up solid wins. I think she's going to keep her 100% finish streak alive. I'm going to go with Jaqueline Amorim by round 1 submission. Now, moving up one weight class in the men's division, we have Azat Maksum taking on Mitch Raposo. Maksum coming into the UFC had a lot of hype, 14-0 prospect. Since then, he has gone 1-2 in the UFC, although his losses have come to really strong competition, Tagir Ulanbekov most recently, and then Charles Johnson. He's a pretty well-rounded fighter, 4 wins by knockout, 5 by submission. He's landed at least 2 takedowns in all 3 of his UFC fights. He's a very efficient striker, straight shots. The cardio had kind of been a concern in his first 2 fights in the UFC. That was definitely something I was worried about in the most recent Tagir Ulanbekov fight, but the cardio really held up in that matchup. He looked good in round 3. It was a very competitive fight against like a legit top 15 guy in Tagir. And then his takedown defense is also really strong, 85% in the UFC. Tagir went 0 for 8 on takedowns in their matchup. So even though he's 1-2, I still think he's a really interesting kind of player in this weight class. On the other side with Raposo, he is 0-2 in the UFC. Both are actually split decisions, so you might have thought, these were very competitive matchups. I think both of these fights really had no business being split decisions. It was like one errant scorecard that just shouldn't have gone down that way. He is pretty undersized, even for flyweight, 5'5", with a 74-inch reach. Not a ton of threat on the feet. He's averaging only 1.62 significant strikes per minute. He's going to go out, push a very grappling heavy pace, but he's really kind of struggled to combine the control time with actually landing effectively. Like in his last fight I think it was against Sumadarji, he landed 6 takedowns and only had 9 significant strikes. So even when he has been able to land the takedown, he's just not able to do a ton with it. I just think Azat Maksum is the much better fighter. I'm going to pick him to win this one by decision. Then we're going to jump all the way up to heavyweight, where we have Valter Walker taking on Louie Sutherland. I want to say both of these guys had opponents drop out within the last few weeks, so get these 2 heavyweights booked on this card. Valter Walker is riding a 3-fight heel hook streak. He's not the greatest wrestler, but his style is pretty aggressive. He's going to force the clinch. He's obviously going to want to get the fight to the ground. That heel hook is really like, his go-to submission. On the ground, if he's not getting the sub, his ground and pound is somewhat limited, but I do think he's probably just the better guy in this matchup. This is Sutherland's UFC debut, a 10-3 record on the regional scene. 8 of his 10 wins are by knockout. He's primarily a striker, does have some grappling ability. If he does get the fight to the ground, he does have some pretty solid ground and pound, but he's a guy who's also fairly aggressive, presses forward, throws in combination, has some nice dirty boxing. I will point out that I think he actually weighed in for the matchup he had, and he looked like very physically diminished from what he looked like on the regional scene. Kind of tells me he might have been on some of the juice, when they're not testing as much. Then when he gets to the UFC, he has to hop off of it because his physique just looked significantly worse than on the regional scene. So that's not great. I'm going to lean towards Valter Walker here. You know, why not just pick him by heel hook? That's been his go-to submission. I'll go Valter Walker, round 1 sub. The next matchup is the second super short notice fight with Nasrat Haqparast taking on Quillan Salkeld. Kind of interesting, like a week's notice for these dudes, at least at heavyweight. Like, not everyone's cutting a ton of weight. You might not cut anything, but to cut down to 155 could be a little bit sketchy for both of these dudes. I haven't heard that it's a catch weight, so it does seem like it's going down at, actually the lightweight limit. But starting off here with Nasrat Haqparast, he is riding a 5-fight win streak, back-to-back very close split decision wins against Esteban Ribovics and then Jared Gordon. Personally, I thought he lost both of those fights. I think the Ribovics fight was very, very close. I did definitely lean towards Jared Gordon in that matchup, though. On the feet, he is a high-volume striker, averages 6.4 significant strikes per minute. In his last 3 decisions, so the last 3 fights that have gone the distance, he has landed at least 135 significant strikes. That's pretty absurd volume. He's also been very durable throughout his career. He's only been knocked out 1 single time, and that was against Drew Dober, who obviously hits very, very hard. We have seen in the UFC, he's lacked some of that finishing power. Did pick up a recent KO win against Jamie Malarkey, but he's not necessarily known for his durability. Nasrat's not great when you actually put him on the back foot. He kind of goes that high guard defense, which he does deflect some of the shots, but he doesn't have a ton of counters available to him. And so if you can kind of pressure forward, you can extend your combinations, land some shots that way. On the other side here with Salkeld, he's a pretty fun prospect, 9-1 as a pro, 2-0 in the UFC, very big frame for lightweight. He's 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach, pretty well-rounded. He's got some power on the feet, also some solid wrestling, submission skills. We saw in his UFC debut, he had a 19-second KO, and then in his most recent fight, went the distance, really went the grappling route, 8 takedowns in a unanimous decision win. I'm kind of conflicted with this matchup because I think Salkeld definitely has the higher ceiling. I just don't quite know if he's ready for this step up in competition. I do think he's going to take more of a striking approach in this matchup. Nasrat's takedown defense has been really strong, 84%. He hasn't been taken down in his last 6 fights. And so I do think this is just a little bit too big of a step up. Like I mentioned, the short notice is kind of weird for both of these dudes. I think it probably favors Nasrat just because he is way more experienced against legit UFC caliber guys. I think Salkeld's probably the guy who would have benefited from a longer training camp, really kind of game planning against this specific opponent. So I'm going to go with Haqparast by decision, but don't feel super confident. I do think this is a fight that could swing either way. We've got another heavyweight fight here between Chris Barnett and Hamdi Abdulwahab. We finally get to see the GOAT Chris Barnett back in the octagon. I mean, this dude is must-see TV every time. If you have not watched him, he is a 5'9" heavyweight. He looks like pretty much chewed bubblegum, but he has this wild striking style. He throws a ton of spinning attacks. He fights pretty much in the exact opposite way you would expect someone with his physique to actually go out there and fight. And he's pretty freakishly athletic for his build. Now, he's had some inactivity issues. His last fight was a year ago. He was coming off a torn Achilles, so he already had a pretty long layoff. And then it looked like he re-injured that Achilles in that matchup. So that's not great. His last win was all the way back in 2022. I want to say he's 39 years old. So he's also getting up there in age. Injuries have taken their toll. Can't feel great about him in terms of his win equity in this matchup. Now, on the other side with Hamdi, he's just been super underwhelming. You get this guy coming in his debut. He looks like he has this fun skill set, could hit hard on the feet. He was an Olympic wrestler. Then he pops for steroids, and his last 2 fights have just been very underwhelming. He's an Olympic wrestler who straight up just doesn't wrestle. He has 2 total takedown attempts in his last 2 fights combined. I don't know if it's a cardio thing where he doesn't trust if he goes hard with the wrestling that he's going to have the 3-round cardio. But then even on the feet, he doesn't have any urgency. He's just kind of a very underwhelming dude in this weight class. And I think you actually could have made the case, I think any version of these 2 fighters, Hamdi is going to be the favorite. I think you could have made a better case for Chris Barnett, pre-torn Achilles, because we have seen him take some damage in these fights. He's tough. He's not going to quit on himself, and the other dude kind of gasses out, and then he's able to pick up the win. That's what happened in the last win. I think it was against Collier. But like this current form of Chris Barnett with the injuries, he already kind of was like a long shot in every matchup. I'm going to pick Hamdi. I'll go round 2 KO. Just like the injury history, the Achilles stuff, where it's like he has such an explosive style. I don't think that bears super well. So I'll go Hamdi by round 2 knockout. But I will be hardcore cheering for Chris Barnett. The dude's super fun. He's a dog. So I hope I'm wrong, but I will be siding with Hamdi. Next up, we have an absolute banger between Jose Delgado and Nathaniel Wood, a featherweight matchup. Delgado looks like a super fun prospect. He has a 10-1 record, 100% finish rate, 6 knockouts, 4 submission wins. He is coming off a 26-second knockout against Haider Emil. This was a fight that I thought had like fight of the night potential, was going to be an absolute banger, a war, and he just went out and starched him in under 30 seconds. He throws really well in combination. He has dangerous kicks. He works the body well. He also has nasty knees. We saw that on the Contender Series. That's how he got his finish there. That was the big shot in the Haider Emil fight. Also just very aggressive on the feet, like he's going to push a pace. He's going to throw a lot out there. Now, I do think that Nathaniel Wood is easily his toughest test, by far like the most technical fighter he's gone up against. So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of scales up in this matchup. Nathaniel Wood is 5-1 since moving up to 145. He's a super well-rounded fighter, nasty front kicks on the feet, really clean boxing, also a capable grappler, fights at a very high pace, averages 5.66 significant strikes per minute, and then has really solid cardio, especially in 3-round fights. I think the biggest knock on Nathaniel Wood, and potentially like the biggest difference between these two dudes, is that Nathaniel Wood has had very limited finishing upside at 145. Now, that's not to say he couldn't finish anyone or like he couldn't hurt you. He has landed knockdowns against solid fighters at 145, but he's just not super physically imposing in this weight class and doesn't really have like the full-on KO power to actually put dudes away. I've been really conflicted with this matchup. I think Delgado is way more dangerous. I think Nathaniel Wood is way more proven against like legitimate competition, and he's also kind of proven to be tough to finish. I am just going to side with Jose Delgado here. He has so many dangerous weapons. He is very aggressive. He's going to put a lot out there. I'm going to lean towards Jose Delgado by round 2 KO. I don't think you can count Nathaniel Wood out. I really like him. I'm a fan of both of these dudes, but I will be backing Delgado in this matchup. Then moving up one weight class, we have Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady taking on Mateusz Camilo. Al-Selwady looked really good in his Contender Series fight. It was a pretty like highly anticipated matchup against George Hardwick. I think a lot of people thought George Hardwick, this was like his setup to get into the UFC. Al-Selwady came in with a really solid game plan, looked really good on the feet, picked up the win there. Then he was pretty underwhelming in his UFC debut, was going up against like a pretty dangerous, like powerful Loic Rabajov, and he kind of just looked shell-shocked really early on in that fight. Did start to gain some momentum in the second round, but then got knocked out pretty quickly into the third. He is pretty well-rounded. He's not super special anywhere, but he's fine on the feet. He will look to mix in the grappling also. On the other side here with Camilo, he was submitted in his UFC debut. He's got kind of an interesting skill set. Like, I thought he looked pretty decent in that debut. Really nice body shots, really like digs to the body with some big hooks. Also like showed some interesting groundwork in that fight. Had a really nice triangle attempt, but once he didn't get it, it was like the cardio, or I don't know, the will to win just completely tanked. He was super deflated after he didn't get the finish, and then got rear naked choked pretty shortly after that. So in this matchup, I think Camilo is a little bit more dangerous in terms of like a finishing threat. He is going to throw a lot of big shots. Like I talked about, he is fairly dangerous on the ground. I just think Al-Selwady is a little bit more reliable. I think he's going to come into this fight with more confidence. I don't think Camilo is like quite as intimidating or as strong as a finisher as Loic Rabajov. So I'm going to lean towards Al-Selwady here. I'm going to pick him by decision. I do think he could find a finish. Camilo does kind of leave his chin out there to be hit. I could see him potentially fading into the second, like into the third round, and maybe Al-Selwady picks up the win there. But my official prediction will be to take him by decision. Then we have an interesting middleweight fight between Ikram Aliskerov and the Iron Turtle, Jun Young Park. I think this is a pretty favorable matchup here for Ikram. We've seen so far in his MMA career, his one major weakness has been the chin. Both of his losses have come by knockout. I mean, against like legit competition. Khamzat Chimaev pre-UFC, and then Robert Whittaker within the UFC. And I just think the Iron Turtle, despite being a very good fighter, probably isn't going to test him in that area. Ikram is super well-rounded, 7 knockout wins, 5 submission wins, 3 wins by decision. Within the UFC, he's pretty much been entirely a striker. All 3 of his wins are by round 1 KO, and he hasn't had to land a single takedown. He's powerful, he hits hard, has a really stiff jab, also has some pretty nice knees. We saw him have a nice switch kick knee to set up a knockout in the UFC. I think it was against Alves. Also had a nice slick knee pre-UFC that also led to a knockout. On the other side here with the Iron Turtle, he has a very impressive 9-3 UFC record. He is someone who's really going to want a gritty fight. He wants to get into these clinch battles. He wants to grapple. He wants to test the cardio, drag you into deep waters. In terms of him as an athlete, he's not super explosive. He's not super powerful, but he does have very good cardio. He's tough. He's durable. I am pretty concerned about Park here early in the fight, on the feet. Like round 1, when Ikram is fresh, Park isn't super elusive. He's pretty hittable. And Ikram Aliskerov is very dangerous. So I think Ikram's going to catch him early. Like I talked about, all of his UFC wins have come by round 1 KO. I think he keeps that rolling here. I'm going Ikram Aliskerov round 1 knockout. Then a potential banger here at lightweight between Mateusz Rebecki and Ludovic Klein. Rebecki is 4-2 in the UFC, and his last 5 fights have pretty much all been must-see TV. He had a KO win against Loic Rabajov. He had a submission win against Roosevelt Roberts. Then he had a war fight that he lost late in the 3rd round against Diego Fajeda. He had a fight of the night win against Miktabek Oralbai, absolute banger. And then another banger, fight of the year contender against Chris Duncan. Actually took place pretty recently in August, which not necessarily great in this matchup. He's a dangerous southpaw striker, very powerful, definitely loads up on his shots. He's not just touching you. If he's landing, it is with bad intentions. He has thrown pretty much everything at 100%. Also a very strong grappler, 7 submission wins in his career. He has landed at least 2 takedowns in 5 of his 6 UFC fights. Like I mentioned, this is a pretty quick turnaround. Had that war against Chris Duncan in August. He has taken a lot of damage, just like overall in his UFC run. It's only been 6 fights, specifically the last 3. He has eaten a lot of shots in those matchups. On the other side here with Ludovic Klein, we saw Mateusz Gamrot in his last matchup break his 7-fight unbeaten streak. Klein is very well-rounded. He's a clean striker. He works all 3 levels. Also a very capable grappler, but did really struggle in that area against Mateusz Gamrot. And then we have seen he has lacked some of that finishing upside within the UFC against like the legitimate competition. So I'm expecting a pretty awesome fight here. That's kind of just the way Rebecki fights. If you're not finishing him early on or just getting nuked, like you're probably in for a really, really tough matchup. And I kind of lean towards Rebecki here. I am worried about the durability, but like I talked about, Ludovic Klein, not necessarily known for being a super hard hitter, a super like potent finisher. And so I think Rebecki hits harder. I think he could rock Klein a few times in this matchup. He could obviously also find a finish, but I think he is going to win. Potential fight of the night, decision war here for Rebecki. Now, I believe we have arrived at the main card, starting off at light heavyweight with Aleksandar Rakic taking on Azamat Murzakanov. And Rakic, it just kind of feels like he hasn't lived up to his full potential. At one point within the UFC, he was 14-1 with a 6-1 UFC record. His only career loss was a split decision against like a very tough Volkan Ozdemir. So it looked like he was going to be an inevitable title challenger, potential champion at some point. Now he is riding a 3-fight losing streak. His last win was all the way back in 2021. So the start of that losing streak was against Jan Blachowicz. Was in a very competitive fight, like I will say, but blew out his knee in that matchup. Obviously, he had a long layoff. Then he returned against Yuri Prochazka. Not necessarily the easiest return fight, but he was looking good in that one. Ended up getting knocked out in the 2nd round. And then his most recent fight, the competition wasn't getting any easier. A unanimous decision loss against Magomed Ankalaev. Wasn't a bad performance, but did just kind of feel flat. Like it never felt like he was really in control of the matchup or even really had the urgency to go out there and get it done. When you look at him, like he is a very big, physically imposing light heavyweight, but it always feels like he's at a power disadvantage where it's like the shots he's landing just don't have the same impact and damage as the guy he's going up against, especially once he's getting into like, the top 10, top 5 in terms of like the strength of schedule. And then it also just seems like he doesn't really have that killer instinct. Now, I will give, I guess, some of the blame to his corner from his last fight. He was potentially down 0-2 to Magomed Ankalaev, and his corner was telling him that he was up 2-0 and pretty much like he could coast in the final round and win. It was absolutely awful advice. So some of that does go on the coaches, right? Like if your coach is telling you you're winning and you can cruise, I get like following them, but like he's also in the fight. He's got to have some awareness of like, this might not be going as well as I expected heading into this matchup. I will point out that Azamat Murzakanov, very good fighter, definitely a step down in competition from his last 3, right? Like Jan Blachowicz, former champion, Yuri Prohashka, former champion, Magomed Ankalaev, he fought him before he was the champion, but now former champion. Like Azamat could potentially get there, but as of right now, does not have the same overall track record. But he is undefeated at 15-0. He is 5-0 in the UFC. 11 of his wins are by knockout, 1 by submission. Only gone to decision 3 times in his career. He is going to be very undersized in this matchup. Azamat is a very small 205er. I would be pretty surprised if like he couldn't easily make 185. Like the dude is 5'10" with a 71.5-inch reach. And it's not like he's super fat. Like he's not the most muscular toned dude in the world, but it's not like he's a lard. It seems like he's just not cutting that much weight. But when you compare him to Rakic, who is 6'4" with a 78-inch reach, I do think that's going to look pretty extreme when these two guys are actually facing off and even in the octagon. Azamat is a very slick southpaw striker. He is more athletic than he looks, like is fairly explosive, does hit pretty hard, does have solid distance management on the feet. You kind of have to when you're going to be pretty outsized in every single matchup. Even his most recent fight, like against Brenson Ribeiro, that's a really big light heavyweight. Made quick work of him. Obviously a much worse opponent than Rakic here. And I talked about the power. He's landed a knockdown in every single one of his UFC fights and finished 4 of the 5 by KO. So in this matchup, I kind of have gone back and forth. I could see pathways to both of these guys winning. I do think Azamat is the more dangerous striker. I also kind of trust his fight IQ, and I guess more so just like his will to win a little bit more. Like if he has to put it on the line, I think he will. Even dating back to like early on in his UFC run, I think it was against Tafan, like Inchukwi or something like that. It's kind of crazy to think that like this was just a few years ago, but I think he was down 2 rounds and ended up like going out, putting on a pace in the third, ended up finding the finish, I believe with a knee. So I feel like Azamat has that dog in him in this matchup. I think it's going to be competitive. I think it probably does take place primarily on the feet, but I'm going to go with Azamat Murzakanov by decision. We have seen Rakic, be fairly durable. Like he was finished by Yuri, but that's just who Yuri is. That's what he's going to do. So I do think it goes the full 15, but I'm going to lean towards Azamat here. Then moving up one weight class to heavyweight, we have Aleksandar Volkov taking on Jailton Almeida. And this does feel like a very binary fight. If Jailton Almeida can land a takedown, he's probably going to win this fight. If he cannot, then Volkov is probably going to cruise to a pretty simple win. For Volkov, ever since the Tom Aspinall loss where he was taken down, pretty quickly submitted, he has shown some real grappling improvements. It's always fun to see these guys actually make like significant improvements, especially in the heavier weight classes. It seems like it doesn't happen all that often. So shout out to Volkov for actually putting in the work there. But like after that Aspinall fight, he went up against Alexander Romanov. On paper, that could have been a tough matchup for him. He stuffed all 5 of his takedown attempts. He also submitted Tai Tuivasa, was kind of willing to grapple in that matchup. And then the Ciryl Gane fight, like there were some back and forth grappling exchanges, but he landed 3 takedowns, racked up 4.5 minutes of control time. I thought he won that fight against Ciryl Gane. Obviously, the judges disagreed. I'll also talk about Gane later on, obviously, in the main event. But then I also think he's gotten even better at kind of like maximizing his frame. This dude is a huge heavyweight. He's 6'7" with an 80-inch reach. He's really been using his jab, straight punches, teeps to the body. So overall, I do think this is a better Volkov than, the dude who struggled against Tom Aspinall, the guy who struggled against Curtis Blades and was taken down, I think it was like 9 or 14 times, something crazy like that. Now, on the other side here with Almeida, we've only seen one man in the UFC actually stop his grappling, and that was Curtis Blades. And when I say stop, like, Curtis Blades was still taken down 9 times. He just didn't really get like firmly controlled on the ground. He was clinched, but he never got dominated on the mat, and he really like minimized any of the damage coming back to him. Ended up finding that finish with like the short elbows in the clinch when Almeida was kind of just holding on to the legs. But like, that's been the guy who's done the best, someone who was taken down 9 times by Almeida. And Curtis Blades, like one of the best, if not the best, grappler or wrestler in the heavyweight division. Almeida has finished 7 of his 8 UFC wins. Shout out Derek Lewis for lasting 25 minutes somehow. 3 knockouts. Those are like ground and pound finishes. And then also 4 submission wins. He has an extremely high 60% takedown accuracy. He averages 6.58 takedowns per 15 minutes, and he has absorbed 1 or fewer significant strikes in 6 of his 9 UFC fights. So a lot of his fights, there have been very little resistance. He's not someone who's patient. He's not going to go out there and stand, try to play the striking game for the first few minutes. He's probably going to shoot within the first 20 seconds, and we're going to know pretty early on, like, does Volkov have any chance in this matchup? Because if Almeida just takes him down and grounds him instantly, it's probably going to be a rough night for him if that is the case. I do just feel like Almeida is kind of like a different level of athlete. He's one of these guys that like really could be fighting at 205. He just realized that heavyweight's so bad and you don't have to cut weight to get there. And so he's kind of just come in and been pretty dominant. He's a super relentless grappler. I'm just leaning towards him being able to get his grappling going here. I'm going to go with Jailton Almeida, round 2, ground and pound KO. I talked about how he is kind of, super reckless, or maybe reckless isn't the right word, but he's very urgent to land the takedown. Once he does get you there, he does become a lot more patient, where he's not just going to like completely gas himself out in the first round. He's not going to force things that aren't there. So I wouldn't be shocked if he has success in round 1 and then maybe turns on the aggressiveness a little bit more, or earlier in the second round in terms of like landing shots, threatening with a submission. So I'm going to go round 2, ground and pound KO. I do think Almeida gets it done in this matchup. If Almeida does win, I will feel bad for Volkov because he probably should be the guy in there for the title fight. Like, I do think he beat Ciryl Gane, and you go from potentially like fighting for the title to now getting a super tough matchup against this super dangerous grappler. So do kind of feel for him here, but it's kind of the way the chips fell. Now at bantamweight, we have the return of Umar Nurmagomedov post-title shot taking on Mario Bautista. And Umar is just a super well-rounded fighter. He's not necessarily like supremely dominant in one area, but he is just really good at pretty much everything. He's been the guy who's been the closest to beating like prime Merab. Went 5 rounds, 1-2. Like, he was in that fight. I think some people like to have revisionist history there. Merab is awesome. I think Merab's the bantamweight GOAT. Umar definitely looks like he is easily the biggest threat to actually beating Merab, especially with Umar being younger and Merab aging. Like, if I had to pick one dude now who's going to stop the Merab reign, I think you have to go with Umar Nurmagomedov. He's a very fluid, creative striker on the feet, also a very strong grappler. He's landed at least 3 takedowns in 4 of his 6 UFC wins. The 2 fights that he did not land at least 3 takedowns, they both ended in round 1. And that really is what makes him so dangerous, is that on the feet, he can pretty much hang in there with anyone. But then when you have to deal with the threat of the grappling, first off, he can actually do work on the ground, land takedowns, rack up control time, land some ground and pound. But then it also just makes you less dangerous on the feet because you're so worried about the takedown. Like, if you were in a pure striking match between Umar and Corey Sandhagen, it's probably pretty competitive, but Umar's going to look a lot better on the feet when Corey has to be super concerned about the grappling that's coming back at him. On the other side here with Mario Bautista, he is riding an 8-fight win streak. He's a high-volume striker, very good footwork, straight shots, not someone who's going to, put himself in a ton of danger, overextend. He has been a little bit susceptible to getting taken down, only a 67% takedown accuracy. Ricky Simone took him down 2 times. Damone Blackshear took him down 4 times. Now, he did win both of those matchups, but neither of those dudes were even comparable to Umar in terms of like striking. Where like if Umar's getting that work done on the ground and then also has his ability on the feet, I do not think that Bautista is going to fare super well. So I do just think that Umar is better everywhere. I'm going to pick him by decision. I think Bautista's tough. He's going to be tough to finish, but I do think Umar kind of cruises. I'll go like 30-27. Like I think he gets it done with relative ease. Then in the co-main event, we have the vacant strawweight title fight between Virna Jandiroba and Mackenzie Dern. And I think this fight could go one of 2 ways. I think we could have like the super fun grappling match against 2 very good grapplers, or we could have 2 grapplers that engage in a very gross, very ugly like striking match. I think we could go either way here. This is a rematch from back in 2020. It was a competitive fight. Mackenzie Dern ended up picking up the decision win. These women are very interesting because they do have overlapping skill sets. They also just have a lot of common opponents. Like, I guess the top of 115 have really just like fought each other over and over again. But for Virna, she is riding a 5-fight win streak against pretty solid competition. Yan Xiaonan, Amanda Lemos, Lupi Godinez, Marina Rodriguez, and Angela Hill. 4 of those were decision wins. 1 came by submission. She racked up at least a full round of control time in all 4 of those decision wins. And I do think when you're comparing Virna and Mackenzie Dern, I do think Virna is a little bit better as a control grappler. Maybe she's not the same submission threat, but I just think in terms of like getting to a position, locking it down, not letting you get out, I do think she probably has the edge in that department. Now, looking at Mackenzie Dern, she is riding a 2-fight win streak, a decision win against Lupi Godinez, and then a very impressive submission win against Amanda Ribas. That was her most dangerous fight. Ribas is someone that Virna did struggle against. I think Ribas is kind of like a bad stylistic matchup for both Virna and Mackenzie Dern, but Dern was able to pick up the win there. Prior to those last 2 fights, it had been mixed results. She's 2-2 in her last 4. She's 4-4 in her last 8. Mackenzie Dern, obviously also a very dangerous grappler. I will say I was kind of surprised with the betting odds. I thought Virna was going to be the betting favorite. Mackenzie Dern, at the time that I'm recording this, sitting at -135. Obviously, it's close, but I did think Virna would be the favorite here. On the feet, Virna Jandiroba is nothing special, but like Mackenzie Dern is really rough on the feet. She's sloppy. She overextends. She leaves her chin on a platter. She kind of wings these punches. She's not super efficient. Like we saw in her last 2 losses, it was Jessica Andrade and Amanda Lemos just like teeing off on her on the feet when she couldn't get the takedown. Like she was just a human punching bag when they were standing. And like I said, like Virna's nothing crazy, but she's fairly technical. She's safe. She's not going to do anything wild and put herself in a really bad position. And so when I'm comparing these two, I don't really see a glaring grappling advantage for Mackenzie Dern. When you look back to the first fight, I do think Virna's the one who has made more improvements. We have seen Mackenzie Dern go 5 rounds 3 different times in the UFC. She did lose 2 of them. Virna hasn't had a 5-rounder in the UFC yet, but she did go 5 rounds in Invicta. I just think she has a very efficient style. Like, she doesn't strike me as someone whose gas tank is just going to completely fail her when we're getting into round 4, round 5. So as you can probably tell, I am leaning towards the underdog here in Virna Jandiroba. Her grappling has looked super impressive. On the feet, she's serviceable. I think she has a style that's like better served to win the championship rounds. And I don't think she's going to get dominated on the ground by Mackenzie Dern. Like, Virna is also a very, very strong grappler. So I'm going to pick Virna to get the decision win. And then we have finally arrived at the main event. Tom Aspinall taking on Ciryl Gane. Now, I'm going to start off by saying it is heavyweight. Anything can happen at heavyweight, right? It's 4-ounce gloves. These dudes all hit very, very hard. But on paper, this does just seem like a nightmare matchup for Ciryl Gane. Tom Aspinall, I think, is the hardest hitter in the UFC. He averages 4.27 knockdowns per 15 minutes. I believe that is second best all time in UFC history. He has only seen round 2 once in the UFC, and the dude, I think, has like 9 total UFC fights. His last 5 wins against like top 10 level competition have all been round 1 finishes. Curtis Blades, Sergey Pavlovich, Marcin Tybura, Alexander Volkov, and Sergey Spivak. And then he also has the highest striking differential per minute in UFC history. He is outlanding his opponents by 5.18 significant strikes per minute. When you were just looking at like significant strikes per minute, 5.18 would be a pretty high number. That is how much Tom Aspinall is outlanding his opponents by. It's just unreal stats there. He's also a very capable grappler, which I think is relevant in this matchup. He has only shot 4 takedown attempts in the UFC, but he has landed all 4 of them. He has submission wins against both Volkov and Andrei Arlovsky. And then from like an athleticism perspective, he's just a top tier athlete at heavyweight. He is super explosive. Like I've talked about, he hits very, very hard. Now, looking at Ciryl Gane, I think some people, maybe are underrating Gane at this point. I think, people sometimes give him some unfair criticism. He's still 10-2 in the UFC, and his losses have come to John Jones and Francis Ngannou. Like, that is just 2 dudes that not a lot of guys are going to beat. Like I talked about, I did think he lost to Volkov, but it was at least a fairly competitive fight. And I talked about Aspinall being a great athlete. Ciryl Gane is also a very rare athlete for the heavyweight weight class. He's light on his feet. He's got explosive kicks. Doesn't have like that crazy pure punching power, but like I said, it's heavyweight. He's a big dude. If he connects clean, Tom Aspinall could certainly get hurt and go out. Despite his athleticism, I do think his footwork is a little bit sloppy. We've seen the grappling be a weakness, right? John Jones just ran through him. A Francis Ngannou on one knee, like in rounds 3, 4, 5, out-grappled him. And it's not just that like he's a subpar grappler. It's also that his fight IQ is just not good, especially on the ground, where like he could have just ridden out top position against Francis Ngannou and won that round 5. Instead, he's trying to like roll for a heel hook and ended up giving up that top position. So like that really led to that fight. I will say he has proven 5-round cardio. He's main evented. He has gone the distance. That is something we have not seen with Tom Aspinall. Like I said, he has only gone into round 2 within the UFC, and he has not faced a lot of adversity. Now, that is a question mark, but it's also like, it's because he's been so good that like fights just have not gotten there. So I'm going to go with Tom Aspinall. Like I said, I think it's a tough matchup for Gane. Could he land a big shot? Sure. Could Tom Aspinall's cardio just be like non-existent and it falls off a cliff in the second half of round 2 into round 3? Like, sure, that's a possibility, but I think the most likely outcome here is a Tom Aspinall finish. I also don't think Aspinall is someone who fights with a ton of ego. Like, he's even talked about it in like a potential Pereira matchup where he's not someone who's going to be like, I want to beat him where he's best and I'm going to strike with him. No, he's like, if I'm fighting Alex Pereira, I'm shooting a double leg within the first 10 or 20 seconds. Like, I think he's going to go to the grappling here. It's the path of least resistance. And even if Gane holds up there, I still think Tom is the better striker, the more dangerous striker. But I do think Aspinall gets this fight to the ground. He could find a submission. I'm going to go with like a ground and pound knockout. I think it happens within 1. And I think Tom Aspinall starts his like true undisputed heavyweight title reign at UFC 321. And so that is going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Let me know your picks down below in the comments. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.